As many people predicted, KYOUSUKE came into Falcons and immediately popped off in his first event. As much fewer people predicted, he absolutely hard carried Falcons, and as almost nobody predicted, he's low-key in ELO Hell because he's the only player on his team that actually found any consistent success in this event before they went out, I believe, 1-2 or 1-3. So KYOUSUKE actually does find the ace on pistol run, and you can see how incredibly crisp his aim is on all of those kills. Kind of unbelievable how smooth his aim actually is. The question was, can he necessarily pull that over to the tier 1 scene in the top scene immediately and not be a bit of a liability in terms of just overtaking duels that he doesn't need to? Because in tier 2, especially with aim like KYOUSUKE, you can get away with taking some duels that maybe you shouldn't, and then you go and you play against the best players in the world, and they'll punish you if your peaks are kind of weak. They'll punish you if you miss a couple of shots or you just make a play on an anti-eco thinking you should kill someone with a Glock and then they double dink you, right? They'll punish you for those sorts of plays, but KYOUSUKE, at times he has had some struggles, but when we talk about struggles, it has to be put into the context that he has carried basically every game he was in. I think the only series where he didn't look all that good was the Gamer Legion series, where I still think he did, at least statistically, quite well. He does farm relatively hard, I would say, against pistols because of his aim, and that's one of the things that is notable, that if you have great aim, you kind of want your best aimers to be fighting against pistols and taking more engagements because they are going to win them more consistently as opposed to someone that relies more on body shots. All that to say that even if you want to take something away from him, it all comes from generally good play. It's not like he's blame F style playing super passive on gun rounds and then getting hyper aggressive against pistols and isn't that good. I mean, he's playing really, really well. The surprise is more about the rest of the team. Why is Nico not doing that well? Why is m0NESY not doing that well? And I have to say that it feels more like a one-off than anything else, because I could put something on Nico doing poorly. I could definitely see that being because of role shifts, and when it comes down to it, it's not about the roles, okay? I want to have a tangent on role cells here for a second, okay? It's not about the role. It's not that because a player plays B on Mirage, okay, B on Mirage is kind of specific, okay, but because a guy plays B on Dust 2, that they're going to do poorly compared to because they didn't play B before. It's more about the resources. It's more about how much your team is putting into you in terms of when someone goes aggressive, you can't have the whole team go aggressive at once. Otherwise, it's just a pug, and pugs suck for that reason. You need one guy to go aggressive and another guy to hold down the fort and make sure that nothing goes wrong when that player is going aggressive. And you can have multiple players being pretty active, but there's a level of freedom that you have compared to other players on your team, and some are going to have more freedom and some are going to have less. And then there are, in fact, spots that suck no matter what, like B on Mirage. There's really not much you can do about it. Long A on Dust 2 is another one. You really can't do that much about it. You're just going to have to hold down the fort and play in pit or play close long doors and just sit there for many rounds. But most roles have a lot of leeway, and that's what it's more about. But off of the tangent for a second, you could say that that could be the case with Nico. I don't really think it necessarily is, but you could say that. However, when it comes to oppers, you don't typically see someone join a team and then the opper starts to feel like he doesn't have leeway, he doesn't have the ability to make plays, and he performs worse. That generally doesn't happen unless another opper joins the team, which usually isn't going to happen. For the most part, teams are pretty strict on the one opper per team rule, and as long as another opper isn't taking over your roles, you're generally going to do fine as an opper because people prioritize that. I mean, teams prioritize that more than almost anything else. All that to say, dude, we could have had Donk and KYOUSUKE on the same team. Imagine Donk, KYOUSUKE, and m0NESY. What a team that would be. That would be so hype, and that would put to bed, finally, the question of, can you have 3 superstars on one team? And I suppose actually Falcons is going to do that over time. But I'm not ready to write it off on one event and say that you had 3 players on one team, they went 1-2, and that's why super teams don't work. I'm not ready to say that. But one thing to notice, because I actually do want to focus on KYOUSUKE's gameplay, not just the narratives around him a little bit, just a little bit. KYOUSUKE has incredibly crisp aim. He's also got very interesting movement. Now, sometimes I feel like, and I'm sure I do this too, and you guys are going to go, but Vu, I saw you do that, and hey, give me a time when I said that. I'm actually interested. But sometimes it comes down to when I've watched a couple of videos breaking down KYOUSUKE's movement and his aim, and sometimes it feels like he does things that are not optimal. Like, technically not the way you should be peaking things. Sometimes it feels like, and I did question if he would transition to the tier 1 scene as well as people were thinking, because everyone's basically been calling him the next Donk. A lot of the time I noticed in tier 2, he would do things like kind of just swing around an angle. Maybe this isn't his general playstyle, but he definitely would do this. He would swing around an angle and basically just counter strafe and instantly headshot people. And the question was, well, if he does that against a tier 1 player with just a slightly faster reactions and maybe a better angle, is he going to be able to do that? Because a lot of people would see him do that type of swing around a corner thing, and it would make him really hard to hit, but it didn't feel like he was really hard to hit because that was a great peak that you should replicate, but rather it felt like sometimes he was really hard to hit because he just reacted so quickly after he noticed someone that it just was confusing for the opponent to actually figure out how to deal with that, you know? But that wasn't the majority of playstyle. It's just one of a few things that I saw him doing that I was questioning. How well is that going to transition? Does he have to stop doing that and then figure out how to manage playing maybe slightly differently? But it seems like he didn't manage or need to figure out much of anything. And one thing that is interesting as well is how willing and ready he is to pick up the op. The op typically is a little more of a positional weapon that you know what you're going to get out of it. However, when you do have players that are young, very quick, and have great aim and a really good knowledge of quick counter strafes to take shots while you're still kind of like moving on your opponent's screen, this is a great example of KYOUSUKE being similar to Nico, because I think Nico was picking up the op a decent amount when he first came onto the scene. There's a nice positional kill on a Molodoi, knew the angle that he was expecting his opponent to come from. Opponent comes from there, doesn't need to hit a crazy shot. The second shot onto Fallen was more talent or skill or whatever you want to call it, hard work, where he just peeks out, fast reaction, fast counter strafe. Not even the easiest shot. I think he had to flick a little bit for that, but nothing crazy. Gets a second kill, gets traded, and that's KYOUSUKE now 18-3. And the craziest part is he's 18-3 and the score is 5-3. It's not like they're up 8-0. It's 5-3. To keep in mind, they win the pistol, he gets an ace. That's hard work. That's hard. That's effort was put in. That was necessary. Then he farms some kills after that. Then he only gets 2 kills, I think, on the next 2 gun rounds, right? The following 2 gun rounds, he only gets 2 kills. What a noob. How are you expecting to win if you only get 2 kills a round on gun rounds? You should be getting 3 or 4, or maybe even 5. Anyways, he is one of the B players. He's obviously the more active one. He's willing and allowed, essentially, to make that pivot over towards mid. Nico's in CT. You see a lot of teams have this double up, kind of crossfiring in middle. They can get a lot done. They can try and prod, look for information, or they can retake control, especially with that smoke that got thrown towards mid doors. You can push your opponents off after they've already taken control of mid doors. This is the type of activity that you're expecting to see. In this case, you don't have the greatest buy from Falcons, so they're willing to triple up in B, which is always a bit of a gamble, but that's one of the many reasons that teams in the history of Dust 2 have always been a little, not always in love with the map, because sometimes you do, especially in the current meta, it's been this way for a while. Sometimes you just have to gamble 3B once in a while, because 2 isn't necessarily enough to consistently hold B. Sometimes you need to overload it, and if they go A when you overload it, your options are lose the round, or your team does what Modesty just did and gets like 3 kills and Tezis gets 1 and they win. But that's not supposed to happen in those scenarios, okay? Usually they're supposed to lose if they go A and you have 2 there. Really, quite simply. But fast forward this round, it's another pistol round. This time he has an op. A little harder for him to get all that much done when he has an op kind of holding an angle. Still somehow manages to find himself a kill running around with the USP. It's one of those things, sometimes, have you ever been in a game, you're playing CS, and you have very few deaths. You're losing 10-6, and you have 6 deaths, and your next teammate has 12. And they go, why are you baiting? You're always last alive. You're always last alive. And you know what I say to that? I say, it's hard for me not to be last alive, because when they come onto my screen, I kill them. And when they go onto your screen, you die. Okay, so it's not my fault I'm last alive. It's because you're not good enough to kill them when they come onto your screen. And that's how KYOUSUKE must feel. I mean, not really at all, okay? That's not really at all, but maybe, maybe. You know, I always wonder, like, what is KYOUSUKE really thinking? He goes into tier 1, everyone tells him it's going to be way harder, and it's going to be this huge step up, and then he just immediately dominates. Is he thinking to himself, like, excuse me, you've had 10 years to perfect your skill at this game, why are you not so good? Why are you so bad? Looking at their money, you can kind of see why he's sticking around. They don't have a crap load of money, but I think they're going to end up with more than enough to go for a buy, because Monesi and KYOUSUKE have plenty, everyone else gets that loss bonus, and yeah, they have probably not perfect utility, but it's definitely one where you can understand. It's pretty close to perfect utility. I was going to say it's one where you can understand, okay, what are we losing next round? Maybe a couple of flashes. You can go for some damage. You can try and take some frags, and maybe you're going to hurt their economy because, I mean, it's not like Furia have won a lot of rounds with lots of players alive. But anyways, there's the type of aggressive play from KYOUSUKE I was expecting to happen a little more often. He goes for the play. He just doesn't realize Yukindar is running up short. Yukindar gets the free kill from behind. But that's a situation where they were actually already down 4v5 to begin with. And those are the exact type of scenarios where you're expecting, or you want your players to make aggressive, risky plays, because if they don't, then you're just going to slowly lose control of the map and lose the round regardless, right? It's not like you're winning the round before that. What you don't want is players making aggressive solo plays when you're up 5v4, 5v3. Like, those are the situations where you really need your team to hold on to as much as they can. But moving on, KYOUSUKE 20-6 now, and this is, spoiler, they lose this game. One of 2 players in double digits, by the way. Now, Deagle in hand, one of the places I'm expecting KYOUSUKE to really impress the most. The Deagle really is a obviously very aim-heavy gun. Now, you can do a lot of things against the Deagle to make it hard for them. I always talk about when I was coaching, and I made it like a step up. I was coaching like advanced, and then I coached an MDL team, and then I coached team that was playing against like Liquid, 100 Thieves, and like tier 1 or tier 2 teams at the time. The difference in Deagles between the tiers of teams was insane, to the point where it was like, if you play against a Liquid and you just hold a static standard angle, that you can do this in pugs. You expect that, like, if you just play crossfires and you play a long range angle against a Deagle, you have the advantage and you're going to win. And then you play against like Twists pulls the Deagle out, and you play, I'm thinking literally the map I'm thinking of, playing dice on overpass, looking towards lane, like banana, and someone peeks from divider and just one deags you immediately. And you're like, hold on, that's really long range. Like, you're not supposed to be able to, but that's what players can do, and that's why you see on anti-ecos it's so common for teams to be pretty aggressive, because if you can force that Deagle to miss the first bullet, if he misses the first bullet, the odds of them getting the kill on you go down drastically. And I know I've talked about this before, but it still remains true, and it's only going to become more and more true as you look at more and more talented players aim-wise coming out of the academy scene and just popping into the pro scene, because teams are starting to have more and more confidence that these academy players can make the transition, that they can make the jump to tier 1, and they can put faith in them. And it's not taking 5 years for a player to really go from a tier 2, a top 50 team, to a top 30 team, to a top 10 team. It's happening in a much more accelerated fashion now. But round 15, 14 rounds behind us is what I meant to say. Pretty pivotal round. Falcons already lost a player. KYOUSUKE moving in. It's Kixan leading, which is what you're expecting on any sort of hardcore entry pathing. You're expecting, or you're hoping for, your star player to go in second. You have a bit of a sacrificial player going in ahead of him. And then the third player is oftentimes a player that throws a bit of utility and then comes in a tiny bit later. The question at times was how you were going to sequence that necessarily. Someone still has to throw the utility. In this case, we had Kixan going in first, then KYOUSUKE, then, okay, that is Fallen trying to do a jump spot, I think, and KYOUSUKE just insta-flicks and kills him regardless. And not only that, I think the gun is right on the corner, so he actually has the chance to pick up the gun. But Molodoy not going to fall victim to the Deke shot, or to the KYOUSUKE situation, and gets himself the kill. Then you actually have an interesting situation. Yuri instantly dinked. Actually, very winnable round, but you have KSerrato on the rotate, gets a lot of damage done, not only with the spray, but spraying into 2 players coming through a Molotov. So you have a retake. Molodoy has the op, but it looks like it was communicated that these players are extremely low, so he knows to pull out the USP, and that makes that's always going to make a massive difference, right? If you have an opper that's using the op in that situation, really nice play by Yakindar, by the way. I mean, nothing like crazy going on from Yakindar, but just good awareness, smooth and very quick with it to not have any downtime where you give your opponent a chance to reposition. You know where he likely is, you know where you can get the kill on, you know he's not closet because the nade already cleared that out. There's really only one position he can be, and KYOUSUKE, or Yakindar rather, finishes off the round, 9-7. I'm really interested in the Furia story as well, to be honest, because Furia just turned this around so incredibly, and Molodoi is such a great pickup, and Fallen, I don't think he's been that good on the rifle, but his calling while rifling has been really impressive. It seems like the rifle fits his calling style, where he can do certain plays, like information plays, that didn't make as much sense with the op, and sometimes you would still make them with the op, but I question, why are you doing that? Shouldn't you be playing kind of more for yourself? But he can make some sacrificial plays now that make a lot of sense, and he does it with a rifle. It just all adds up. Still, there's a focus on KYOUSUKE in this game. KYOUSUKE, okay. To be fair, a lot of what he's doing is really just pretty standard gameplay style, and he's just hitting some really nice shots, really crisp shots. There's not a lot of like decision making, I feel like, going on with KYOUSUKE until here. He does take 94 damage from a molly, which is not great. However, at the same time, his team was already pretty much dead. Molodoi gets 2, KYOUSUKE, that pathing has to be... Surely there was a path he could have taken where he just jumps around here. Maybe he's thinking he must be thinking it's worth it, because if someone peeks out from the ramp here and he's going around like that, he thinks they're going to kill him a little more easily. But it could be one of those scenarios where he's just kind of in the heat of the moment and he's just trying to take the path that he knows, and he's not overthinking it, or he doesn't even realize how much damage he's necessarily taking from the molly, which was a lot. It was 94 damage. Puts them in a situation where they're down 10-7. Gives his teammate a little love tap there. Understandable. They're having a pretty bad game. Sometimes you got to let them know. You say sorry afterwards. I definitely didn't mean to shoot you, but actually I definitely did. You keep that one to yourself. Really aggressive position from Yakindar. And this is what I was talking about. Yakindar, man, he's just going to win. Okay, never mind. I was saying he was going to win them the round with that angle, like just in the greatest position, and nobody clears it. But Tezes does actually clear it. KYOUSUKE walks into the op from Molodoi, and this is one of those games. You look at the scoreboard and you see that KYOUSUKE got 22 frags, but when it came to the kind of end of the game, the last 4 or 5 rounds, he hasn't gotten a lot done. The problem is, I don't really think that's on him. I think he's not, for the most part, when he dies in these rounds, a lot of the time the round is already kind of decided. You know, making that play up short, 2 players die before. I think they're like 2v5 by the time he dies, and he doesn't make a perfect play taking 90 damage from Molly, but at the same time, he doesn't lose his team the round. Even if he gets a kill or 2 there, they're still losing, right? And the same thing goes for most of these rounds. They're not finding the openings that they want. KYOUSUKE is pretty much doing his job, but he's not fragging out. But if you looked at like a graph of when the kills happen, you'll see that he had, 18 kills in the first 8 rounds, and he's had 4 kills in the following 13. But okay, the walkout middle, there is a smoke down towards CT. They have the re-smoke plus the molly towards the boost. Swing out looking in... Oh, the leg shot because he's going up the middle and there's a gap above the smoke, or did they nade that smoke out? Let me look at this one. Typically you hug the wall because there often is a gap above that smoke. This is just a straight up random spam. Well done. And then he just gets shot in the side. Is that really just how this round goes for KYOUSUKE? They walk out. You could argue maybe they take, maybe it's a little telegraphed based on the way the round is played out that they're actually making this play, but KYOUSUKE gets legged. I feel like that's a sequencing problem. Don't you usually have someone a little bit more ready? Like you have someone walk up here and this player has more ability to pivot and trade on that player window, as opposed to 2 players running up like this and nobody's actually looking towards window? Or is this a situation where maybe there's usually a 3rd player, like Monacy is looking towards window, Monacy tosses the flash, he goes for the double flash, and then okay. So I think there's a situation where m0NESY's expected to be holding the window position, which is, I see a lot of teams do in fact do this, and then they throw that flash as like very meta play I've seen recently. Yekindar is kind of in the, well, he's in the exact spot you want to counter that if your opponent isn't actually posting up with that op, especially in the case that KYOUSUKE is already legged, so he just has no ability to turn around to trade. As soon as he gets surprised, he gets killed there. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to see what other teams do with the pathing, because it can never be bad to path up along this wall so you have a little bit more ability to pivot towards window. But if the flash is going to come over right here, it might blind you if you're in that position, so maybe you have to move up. But then can you not move up? I don't know. I feel like the pathing lines them up to get killed by that exact play, and that play from Yekindar is not a crazy play by any means. Like, that's kind of the standard play. You expect someone to be towards window. They're going to look for a timing to peek out, and if you're throwing flashes like that, and as soon as you throw those flashes, you aren't ready for the player to peek, then of course you're going to have the most obvious counter strat ever, is to just, oh, they flashed over, time to peek, they're both looking the wrong direction, right? But it could just be as simple as one player should be looking towards window, or KYOUSUKE got really unluckily legged, right? But again, another round, 12-7 down. Really, Falcons, I have to question why this is so bad. Why this is like a team meltdown, because again, I'll say KYOUSUKE has like 4 kills in the last 14 rounds. But how many of those rounds, we've watched them, pretty much all of them, how many of those rounds has he had a chance to get a kill? How many of those rounds has he really made a clear mistake? Look at this round. The team is just dead. The entire map is gone. KYOUSUKE is inside a long, like, what is this, a Face-It pug? We can't survive. It's 120 and we've got 1 player left alive. That's what happens in Face-It. That's why I say in Face-It, you can't, like, sometimes I say in Face-It games, you can't wait out a smoke if your opponent smokes you off. You have to, if you go to a place and your opponent smoke it off at the beginning of every round, that it's dangerous, because by the time the smoke is gone, your entire team is dead. That's Face-It pug situation. What the hell is this? ELO Hell is what it is.